So this is our live primary Q&A. You've got here with you today, Rebekah, Migwambo. Tell us a little bit about you, Rebekah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rebekah Akinyi Migwambo, an educator in Kenya, currently working with teachers at Kenya Connect. Welcome.
Thank you, Rebekah. And I am Eleanor Sykes. I am the head of education at the Commonwealth Education Trust, and I'm part of the Teach2030 program team. And as many of you hopefully will know, we've been running live workshops now for not far off a year, once a month. And we've decided to start doing Q&A sessions. And these Q&A sessions we've divided up into secondary, which was last month, and primary, which is this month. And what we plan to do with those is to co-present with partner teachers and people working in education that we partner with. And Rebekah is one of them from Kenya Connect. So last month, she presented a workshop with our secondary specialist, Alex Starr. And today she has been, she's come on board to chat primary questions and answers with me. I was a primary school teacher for 20 years. So I'm definitely a primary school person, not a secondary school person. Although one likes to think one's teaching abilities could translate, but I think I'm more comfortable with primary, that's for sure. Anyway, so what we're just going to do today is, Rebekah and I, first of all, there was a question from our last Q&A around practical active learning, which I'm just going to quickly discuss now. And then Rebekah and I were going to talk about how, although I don't teach anymore, I am going back into the classroom to do a few days here and there to make sure that I still know what it's like to be a teacher. And Rebekah and I were going to talk about what one would need to remember going back into the classroom. If you have any comments, if you're following alongside, if there's any comments that you would like to say, I'm just writing down in the comment section on Facebook. Oh, Sharon is there. She can hear us. Hello, Sharon. Sharon works with Rebekah. Fantastic. If you have any questions at all, please do note them in the comment section below on Facebook. Okay, so Rebekah, sorry, forgive me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the question that Alex said that came at the end of your session last time was how to apply practical active learning strategies in specific subjects, I think. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so I'll give my thoughts first and then over to you, Rebekah.
Okay.
So I think this relates perhaps to the whole thinking behind Teach2030 courses, which is that everything that is in our courses is all to help you to become a better overall teacher. So it's foundational skills. So it's not talking about subject specific or grade specific skills. It's talking about the courses contain information to help improve your pedagogical understanding, to make sure that the information that you have is recent and up to date, and to also teach new ideas, techniques, strategies, and so on for you to try in your classroom. So everything that you find in the practical active learning course, for example, you can use in primary, you can use in secondary. So a turn talk, which is a very simple technique that's used everywhere, from in business to schools to wherever, where you are encouraging people to turn around, or children, and talk to the person next to them. You give them a specific topic, a specific question, etc. That totally will work, whether it's primary, secondary, TVET, different forms of higher education. So if you are looking into thinking, which of these strategies can I use? I think what you have to do as a teacher is what we do best, is you have to adapt. You have to think, right, how can I fit this to suit my needs, to suit the needs of my learners? Because that's what we do all the time as teachers. So everything that you find in our courses will work in whichever age range you teach. So don't think I can't use this in my classroom. Just have a little bit of thinking outside the box, thinking, how can I make this work for me? Did you have anything to add, Rebekah?
Okay, thank you, Elena. And just to to a little bit add on what you've said. Yeah, for the practical active learning course, like Elena has mentioned, it's not grade specific, it's not subject specific, but we as teachers definitely know that we have at some point, we have the clients in the classroom. We call them the clients in the classroom, and we have to engage them in meaningful learning. And so for in practical active learning, we are trying to look at the active learning sessions versus the passive learning sessions. So sometimes, or most of the times, if we could talk from experience, for example, we went into the classrooms and yes, maybe an assignment was given and it was perceived that learning was taking place. And at this point, we also have quite a different kind of learners in the classroom. And so at some point for you to measure, like you need to measure if learning is taking place in the classroom. And so sometimes we, when we engage the students in some learning activities, we would like so much to have them participate in their learning. So with practical active learning, we are trying to engage our learners into the learning through various activities. It doesn't matter their grade, it doesn't matter their level of education at any particular point, since we believe that when learning occurs, if the learner or the client is directly involved in their learning, then there's more learning likely to take place in comparison to the other. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Rebekah, very much. And I think that's actually something that Rebekah has made very clear, which is that particularly perhaps with active learning, it's thinking of ways of engaging those children in the learning itself. And all those techniques and strategies can be adapted to suit you and your needs. But also, this is what we are here for. So if you have further questions and you would like support on how to adapt the Do Now strategy, for example, for your class, then ask us, because that's what we would love to help you with. So I can see we've got quite a few people following us on Facebook, which is great. If anybody has any questions, please do put them down. But while we're waiting for any further questions, Rebekah, perhaps we should have a quick discussion about what you would say to me going back into a primary school classroom for the first time in 5 years. So I was a teacher for a long time, long time. But I haven't taught my own class for a while. In fact, Rebekah's sort of seen me in action because I was in the Kenya Connect schools in November, and suddenly I had to speak to a lot of children. So it took me back into the zone. But Rebekah, what? Let's assume you're talking to a trained teacher, which I am, but I've been out of the classroom for a while, and you're in the classroom every day watching the teachers that you support teach. What do you notice that you think is an area that is generally successful, and then areas where you think teaching classroom practice often needs a bit of tweaking, needs a bit of improving?
Okay, your question puts some smile in my face every time I get to hear you ask it. So yes, I agree. You have been in the classroom for quite a long time. You took a break, I would call it a break, and now it's time to get back. So at the back of your mind, maybe as you seated, there's that tendency that you might tend to think, okay, things did not change as much, but things changed. One, it's going to be a whole new experience to you as far as the students that you're going to meet in the classroom are concerned. You were used to maybe a cohort after another. You took a 5-year break. So giving an analogy, that's a child born and probably walking now. So probably there's some sort of transition in this child that you should expect. So as teachers, we have the professional preparation that you're supposed to have. And before you get into the class, once you have to get to know which class you're going to get into, which grade. Previously, you were in the 7th grade. Right now, you're going to handle the 5th grade. So these are a little bit different for you. That's one. Two, does that preparation you come in with in terms of preparation in line with the curriculum of your country? Then we also got a little bit of lesson planning and classroom management strategies that you need to arm yourself with as you get back to the classroom, because we're talking of the current generation of learners in comparison to the the previous 5 years. You'd find that there's some change in the kind of technology that is going to be used in the classroom. So we've seen great development in as far as EdTech is concerned, and new applications, new learning management systems are coming up. So in that school that you're going to move into, maybe they've got a new learning management system that you need to equip yourself with on how you're going to navigate. So you need to be prepared before you get into the classroom, because we've always said, like, for you to facilitate proper learning at any point, whatever strategy you're going to use, whatever tool you're going to use in the classroom, you must have equipped yourself well and know how to, remember you're going to facilitate learning, and so you should be in a better position to facilitate learning in this classroom using the particular tool that you have. So apart from the normal way in which a teacher would prepare, we talk like right now the world in the educational field, everybody is talking about EdTech. So this is an area I've always felt like you need to keep improving day in and out. Where you've been in the classroom, yesterday's technology, today's technology, there's definitely something new you're learning into this. So Elena, as you walk in there, you need to do some due diligence in as far as the technological bit is concerned.
Absolutely, Rebekah. Thank you for all your top tips. I certainly think that I'm going to remind myself of strategies to learn children's names quickly, because it's amazing the difference that it has. Obviously, when you use a learner's name is incredibly powerful. And I have actually been in some schools where there have been very large numbers of children in a class. However, the teacher didn't know all their learners' names. So for me, that has to be one of the crucial things you must do straight off, so that the child feels there's some personalized learning going on. Thank you. I will keep you posted, Rebekah. I'm looking forward to it. We have actually had a question come in from Indigo Raven. Thank you, Indigo Raven. So the question says, hello, any suggestions for how to group learners for practical activities, especially large classes? I think that's a very good question. And thank you very much for that. I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. She's seen a bird outside. I think that when you're doing any kind of practical activity, you have to first of all think about obviously what it is that the learners are doing. What equipment or resources does it need? Or maybe it doesn't need any resources. Maybe it's just practical because they're moving around or so on. If it's practical because they are using something physically, then I think how you group is dictated by how many of that resource that you have. So you may not have rulers for every child in the class if they're doing something with rulers. So that will dictate how your grouping works. I would say that if you have a large class, it is challenging to have everybody doing something practical at the same time. So if it were me, I would break that teaching lesson down probably. I would do my introduction as a whole about making sure that my learning objective, lesson objective was clear, what I wanted the children to learn from the lesson, breaking it down as we talk about in our planning lessons course into the success criteria, the steps that they were going to do to achieve that learning objective. But then I might well have one group doing something that consolidates a piece of previous learning, and then one group doing the activity, or half the class, if you like, but groups into different groups within whatever space you have. That second group are the ones who are actually doing the practical activity. And then I would probably focus on supporting those learners, and then you'd have time hopefully to swap them over. If you have challenges like that, like a large amount of children, not enough resources for everybody, you do have to really think your planning of the lesson through carefully. You have to think about all the factors that are going to get in the way of your learners learning, such as not enough resources, not enough space. So do you need to reorganize the classroom for this particular lesson? Is it going to be better if all the tables are pushed around the edge of the classroom and the children work in groups on the floor for that activity? Because it just creates more space. There's less noise of chairs and tables being pushed around. So don't treat your classroom as a fixed setting. Your classroom needs to be adapted to work for you and how you want to deliver your lessons the best you can. In fact, if it may be that the lesson is best taught in a larger space, then move out of your classroom. As long as you can go somewhere where you know you can keep the children focused on you, then I'm a big fan of that. I used to teach a lot in the garden outside at the school where I worked because it was really beneficial. So I think the first thing to do when you're teaching practically is to think, how is it going to work in the space that you have? How are the resources going to work in the space that you have? How is the actual number of resources going to work? Do you need to break the lesson down into 2 lessons itself? So one group does it on one day and then another group does it on another day. Not everybody has to do everything at the same time. And that ties in fact, with differentiation. It might support you then if you want to push some learners on because they're ready to do an accelerated version of the lesson. They could be working with the resources one day, and then another day you know that those learners are going to need some consolidation. So you work with them and a slightly tweaked activity. But I think the key thing about doing any kind of practical lesson where you need resources is thinking ahead and planning and working out how is it actually going to go. Do you have enough time? What is it physically going to look like? Rebekah, do you have anything to add?
I'm just all smiles when you're giving us the beat of planning. Like, okay, yeah, for dealing with big groups in a classroom really requires a lot of planning, like going ahead and getting well planned. And at the planning stage, you need to put into consideration the resources you have and the resources you might need for this particular lesson, as well as your lesson objectives. They should go hand in hand. And just like Eleanor has mentioned, if you plan ahead, you'd be able to know at what particular point would you need to have this lesson run through, or you could divide it, subdivide it. So in the planning stage, this is where magic happens to me when it comes to dealing with these larger groups. Because if you get planned ahead of time, you'll get enough resources for your particular session. You will also get to know the relevant space that you would require at that particular moment.
Oh, thank you, Rebekah. I wasn't sure if you'd finished speaking and I was just thinking her voice is gone, but I think you'd muted yourself. Perfect. Thank you very much, Rebekah. We haven't got any new questions on our chat, although lots of people are saying how nice it is to see you and to hear your voice, Rebekah, which is fabulous.
Thank you.
Rebekah, is there anything else that you have spotted in your time in primary classrooms in the last few weeks that you think it's worth us having a quick discussion about here?
Okay, thank you, Eleanor, about that. And something that I've spotted in the classroom that we are actually learning, and in the learning procedure, measuring if learning has taken place or not is also one key area, or if learning is taking place is one area that I'm actually interested in. Referring to the practical active learning course on Teach2030, I love some strategies that are shared as far as lesson reviews are concerned. Traditionally, most of us went through an experience whereby a teacher would walk into the classroom and to find out if the previous lesson was well understood or not, they would pose questions to learners verbally. For example, hey, Eleanor, tell us what we learned yesterday. So at this particular point, you'd find that Eleanor is the one raising the hand in the classroom, and she would be pointed out and she would explain to us that this is what she learned. Then maybe another person in the classroom would be pointed out, Rebekah, yes, tell us, define for us this, we learned it in our previous lesson. and Rebekah would hear go. And the teacher would be convinced that at that particular point, our students learned. Yet at this particular moment, you could be having maybe 20 students in the classroom. So if you take the measurement, maybe some just rough estimates, 2 students out of 20 giving you feedback of what they learned previously. As a teacher, would you still sit back and say, okay, my previous lesson was well taught? What about the 18 students? So in reference to the practical active learning on Teach2030, there are some strategies that I came across and was like, wow, this should be put in the classroom like almost immediately. Strategies like, for example, do now, involves the teachers getting into the classroom, putting out the question up on them, or maybe on the chalkboard on a certain area, give the students some nice wait time for them to engage with this question, engage amongst themselves and discuss, and then give feedback. So in this way, everyone is involved. Another strategy I liked about checking and measuring, evaluating if learning is taking place in your classroom is the no hands up technique. The no hands up technique actually is one that would always have the students alert in the classroom. I've seen it being used in the classrooms that I visit recently for observations with teachers, and I like it. Why? Every student is attentive and alert to engage, because maybe if I just give a brief explanation of the no hands up technique and how it works, is that in a class of 20, the teacher would definitely have all the names. And Eleanor was here telling us that one of the key as she goes back to the classroom, the first one would be to be able to identify the names of the learners. I want you to take a step back and remember when you're in school and when the teacher mentioned you, what did you feel? At least in as much as maybe if it was a time for you to answer a question, you might be a little bit scared, but you realize that the teacher was noticing your presence in the classroom. So with the no hands up technique, the teacher writes down the names of the learners, puts them in a pot. And one of the norms that is in the classroom is that whenever there is either a question or at a particular point, the students have to contribute about anything, the teacher would just pull the name of the student, show it, and it's you who would have to respond to whatever response that the teacher wanted at that particular point. So in this case, every learner turns out to be alert. And so you find that they are so engaged in the learning process as they anticipate at what point is my name going to be mentioned? I'm not so sure whether it will be a question I'll be required to answer, or it would be a contribution, a comment, a recommendation I'm supposed to give. So at this point, everybody wants to participate. So I find this strategy quite interesting, and one that can help a teacher actually as they take in their classroom, as they go on with the facilitation of learning in the classroom, they can actually get immediate feedback at that particular moment.
Thank you, Rebekah, so much. It sounds like you've memorized our practical active learning course, which I love. And I love that you like the strategies that I like too, which is why they're in the course. So that's great. So Rebekah there has touched on various active learning strategies, but they can also be used as formative assessments, as she said. And in fact, the stretch it technique, which is a very simple questioning technique where you extend the learner's answer to a question, like Rebekah was saying, and then use that to ask more questions, and in fact move into perhaps asking the whole of the class who agrees, who doesn't agree. If you have a different opinion, stand over there. If you have the same opinion, stand here. These are all ways of making quick, snap and accurate judgments about the level of learning that's going on in your classroom at that time. And as teachers, that's something incredibly important that we should be doing regularly. We're going to close in a minute, but just before we do, I was thinking back on our discussion just a little bit ago about resources and planning and practical lessons. Obviously, we are primary, well, I am a primary school teacher, so we are talking about primary level. So it may be that you are talking in this context refers to large numbers of very small children, in which case I would say it's absolutely crucial to divide up that learning objective and your class, so that you can really work with one class, one group of children directly, making sure that they're doing what you want them to do, because they might be quite young, and that can be quite challenging if you've got a lot of children. So You can have one group of children doing something that you're confident they can be getting on with independently, which generally would be some consolidation of something that you know they have learned previously. And then you would work with a smaller group to start pushing the learning on if it needs to be a practical lesson. Because practical, large number of children, not enough resources, quite young children, certainly a challenge. So it all comes down to really planning and thinking how that is going to work. I'm so sorry, I'm going to mute while my dog barks. Anything else from you to add, Rebekah?
Okay, you had said we are closing in a minute, but from the chat, I can see a question from James Musioka. How do you deal with learners of low attainment in a class? Maybe we could look at it just before.
Yep, absolutely.
Just before we close it up,
Yep.
Elena?
Yes, so, absolutely. Oh, sorry, you go. I wasn't sure which of us was going to go then, but you start.
It's okay. So in every classroom, you're definitely going to have learners with different ability. And one thing as an educator I believe in is that every learner can learn. The pace could vary, but every person can learn. So for low attainment learners, there's the bit of time. You actually need more time as a teacher with them. And you would strategize the time, like we have just talked of some sort of doing some measurement in your classroom as you facilitate learning, or what we call the formative assessment. As learning is going on, you tend to check. And so for learners of low attainment in a class, you would definitely notice them in the classroom as learning goes on. And it does not mean that they aren't learning. The students are learning, but it's only that their pace is quite slow. So for me, my go-to is usually additional time with these learners, and in particular looking at the specific areas and specific bits of the lesson objectives that this learner is taking time to attain. So once I find out, or rather identify a particular learner to be one that is taking time in their learning, you would definitely create more time. And there's one thing we call individualized learning sessions with this particular learner. And this could help you come down to their pace and help them learn slowly as they catch up with the others. It's quite a gradual process and requires a lot of patience. The good thing with the teachers I have seen and visited, their patience is so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebekah, for your lovely ideas there. For me, it comes down to, as well, differentiation. So as a teacher, our responsibility is to plan, as Rebekah said, for all the learners in your class. And they probably will divide into 3 groups, your higher attainers, middle attainers, and lower attainers. Now, they will not stay in those groups for all the subjects at all, because as we know full well as adults, we might have more of an aptitude or a preference for maths over reading, for example. So it's very important as teachers that we don't assume that all children are a higher attainer or a lower attainer, because that's not the case. I was interested, James, and very pleased to see that you used the word attainment, because the word ability suggests that children are fixed there. In the same way, if we use a fast learner or so on, what we're trying to do is to show that all learners have the potential for growth. And by using the word attainment, we make that very clear that currently they're attaining at this level, but they may then attain at that level with further teaching, etc. So differentiation, looking at what your lesson objective is for that lesson and thinking, okay, is that going to work for all my learners? Well, I can think of a group here who are going to struggle with it. So how can I adapt it? What can I get them to do where they are still working for the same learning objective, but it's pitched at a more suitable level for them? And in the same way, your higher attainers, rather than just leaving them to get on with nothing because they finish quickly, you need to think, how can I extend them What can I get them to do? It doesn't always have to be moving your higher attainers on to something more difficult. It can be, again, consolidating what they know. So asking them to explain it to another learner, to make a poster of it. How would they write down the key steps? Can they draw a diagram of what they've learned? It's all of these things that really consolidate the learning. But I would say, as Rebekah said, it may well be that your lower attainers do require a little bit more time from you. But again, it comes down to your planning and thinking, if I give them these couple of minutes at the beginning, I think they'll then be able to work independently, and I'll then be able to go and move around the classroom and support the other learners. But for me, the most important thing is, as Rebekah said at the start, is recognizing that all children can learn, and that it's our responsibility to adapt our planning to make sure that all of them are accessing our learning or our teaching. Thank you. Look, we've got lots of comments. So thank you, Ebere, for your comment. Awesome. And Joyce, hello, Joyce. We know Joyce. Joyce is in Nigeria. Lovely to see you, Joyce. I like the fact that the goal is to help them catch up to the others and not to meet them where they are and leave them there. Absolutely. Absolutely. We are aiming your learning objectives, your planning. You have very strict, or not strict, very set criteria of what you want your learners to achieve, and it's up to us as teachers to do all we can to make sure that they get there. Excuse me. Right, thank you so much, everybody. Rebekah, anything to say to finish off? No. Shall we say our goodbyes to everybody then, Rebekah? Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. And
thank you so much. And if anybody watching would like to co-host a secondary or a primary Q&A with us, the Teach 2030 team, we'd be absolutely delighted. We want to work with as many teachers working in as many different settings and locations as we can to really support our global Teach 2030 community. And do please go to teach2030.com today, find a course, one of our wonderful courses. You can also find our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, which have lots of videos and tips and ideas of how to keep continuing your teaching practice and connecting with fellow teachers. Many thanks to everybody, and have a great rest of day.